Nā te mutunga, nā te tama. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ka inoi tātou, let us pray. E te atua kaharawa, e tuwhera ana ngā ngākau katoa ki a koe, e mohi o te ana ngā hia katoa, e kore hoke, e ngāro i a koe te mea huna, whakahāngia iho tō wairua tapu, hei whakamā i ngā whakaro ia o mātou ngākau. Kia tino aroha ai mātou ki a koe, kia aroha manaaki ai tētahi ki tētahi, kia tika ai te whakanui i tō ingoa tapu. E te atua o te rangimarie, arahina mātou e tō wairua tapu, o mai ki a mātou te māramatanga, te ngākau nui me te whakapono, kia tāpai ai te ngākau pono mo te kaupapa o te rangimarie me te aroha manaaki ki te tangata katoa. E te atua o te kakano o te tipu o te hauhake, te kaihanga o te hia, te kaihanga o te manawa, he nui, he pono hoki mo te katoa. Ka inoi mātou kia homai ki a mātou i te hunga matikai, ki te rapu i te rongomau, me tika i te ao. Āwhina mātou, ki te maumahara ki te mohi o kai o mātou, taha koe i ngā wā katoa. Ko koe te oranga mō mātou anaenei, ake e tone atu. Mā te atua mātua, te tama me te wairua tapu, ake, āmene. Our Heavenly Father in heaven, we give you thanks and glory and praise for this time to be together. May your peace, te rangimarie, me tō aroha, reign supreme at this time, in this space. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'm Mike Summerfield. I'm one of the ecumenical chaplains here at the University of Otago. On behalf of our entire chaplaincy family, the Dunedin Abrahamic Interfaith Group and the Centre for Global Migrations, I extend a warm welcome on this cold evening to you all. This is a special occasion. An occasion so special that half an hour ago it had its own cake. This is the 20th annual Peace Lecture. The Dunedin Abrahamic Interfaith Group was born out of a desire for solidarity among local faith leaders following the events of September the 11th, 2001. In a world where misunderstanding and alienation fueled hostilities, members of three Abrahamic faith traditions, Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, wanted to create a space where understanding and common ground could be sought in pursuit of peace. Since its inception, we have hosted these peace events annually. We've had the privilege of hosting various local and international guests who've shared their perspectives and personal experiences on the vital role of faith and religion in conversations about peace. Our speaker tonight will be introduced shortly, followed by responses from our three esteemed panellists, each representing a specific faith group: Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. There will be more on them in a moment. Before we begin, may I welcome the thousands of people who are at home watching online and all of those who will watch over the coming years. Welcome to you as well. There are some housekeeping notes. Please take a moment to notice the closest exit to you. In the event of an emergency, follow the calmest seeming person out one of those doors. Restrooms are conveniently located for you just outside the main doors and across the hallway. And lastly, from this moment on, please silence your mobile phones. Following this event, you are all warmly invited to join us at All Saints Anglican Church, just down the road, for supper. I'd like to invite Professor Janine Hayward, Head of the School of Social Sciences, to introduce our guest speaker. Thank you, Professor Hayward.
Too many things to hold on to here. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou, hui hui mai nei, tēnā tātou katoa. I bring apologies from our Vice-Chancellor and the PVC Humanities, both of whom are very sorry not to be able to join us in person for this evening, but I know one of them is watching online and they will both enjoy the evening later. I've had the tremendous pleasure of working very closely with Jenny in her role at Te Ao o Rangimarie, and it's an absolute honour to be asked to introduce her this evening. And it's also my pleasure to welcome you all here on behalf of the university. Jenny's achievements are so vast that it would take me the entire evening to recount them all, which is not the point of being here. So here are just a few. Dr. Jenny Te Daniel is Te Rarawa. She's a public theologian, scholar, experienced educator, but most importantly, she would say, an incurably devoted grandmother and great-grandmother. In Jenny's early career, she was a social worker, a gangs liaison expert advisor, and then later a tertiary student counsellor. Her first forays into tertiary education in the 1970s were challenging, but she was persuaded by her mentor and cousin, Muru Walters, to give it one more go, and she moved into the study of theology. Jenny completed her undergraduate degree at the University of Auckland in theology in 1991, and then her master's degree in education with honours in 1993. She went on to do a PhD at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California, which was awarded in 2001. Since then, in recognition of her outstanding commitment to global peace and justice through theological education, and for her distinguished service to the Anglican Communion, she has been awarded no fewer than 6 honorary doctorates from 2003 until most recently, 2020. So she is technically, I guess, Dr. Jenny Te Daniel. In March 2010, she was awarded the prestigious Distinguished Alumni Award by the University of Auckland. In November 2010, she was further honoured internationally by being named Alumna of the Year by her PhD school in Berkeley, California. Jenny has a lengthy and impressive record of service within the Anglican Church at local, national and international levels. Until 2013, she was ahurangi of Te Rau Kahikatea at the College of St John the Evangelist in Auckland. She taught at the college from 1992 and she was appointed ahurangi in 1995, becoming, as we've heard, the first lay Indigenous woman to head an Anglican theological college anywhere in the Anglican Communion. She was installed as a lay canon at Auckland's Holy Trinity Cathedral and was a serving member of her General Synod for 15 years. She served almost 10 years as a member of the National Anglican Social Justice Commission and was founder and convener for the National Anglican Women's Studies Centre for 6 years. She has served the worldwide Anglican Communion in roles too numerous to list here, but including convener of the International Anglican Peace and Justice Network, a member of the Archbishop of Canterbury's International Anglican Theological Education Commission, a member of the Anglican Indigenous Network, and provincial link person to the Inter-Anglican Women's Network. She was a member of the 2003 Lambeth Commission. She served as moderator of a World Council of Churches working group from 2000 to 2006, and was a member of the Executive Committee for the South Pacific Association of Theological Colleges from 2009 to 2012. She serves as a member of the Postgraduate Academic Board of the Pacific Theological School in Suva, Fiji. Jenny has written extensively on gender justice, theological education, and race politics. She has taught theological and secular students in New Zealand and around the world. She has been a guest speaker, lecturer, facilitator, media commentator, preacher and panellist nationally and internationally on a whole range of political and theological issues, particularly those concerning social justice, Indigenous rights, feminist politics and theological education. She has served nationally as a member of the New Zealand Arts Council in recognition of her commitment to the arts, the National Interfaith Advisory Committee to the New Zealand Government on Religious Diversity, and she's currently co-chair of the National Religious Diversity Centre. But the achievement Jenny is most proud of is being a beloved nanny to 10 granddaughters, 5 grandsons and 1 great-grandson. Together with her esteemed, wonderful husband, Roro, they are determined that each one of their grandchildren will know the world of opportunity arising for those who, like them, have been taught from a very young age to always give with faith-filled generosity to those in need and to always receive with grace and humility. Such, she believes, is the birthright of every child in the world. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker this evening, Dr. Jenny Tapar-Daniel.
Taku mihi tuatahi. Kia koe te wahine e tuku nei krakia mō tātou. Koutou rā, tēnā koutou te whānau whānui. Tēnā hoki koutou e pai nei I runga I te aroha, me ngā manaakitanga ato tātou matunu I te rangi. Mana tātou e arahi, mana tātou e ata whai I ngā wā katoa nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. E te atua e tō mātou matu I te rangi, e arahitia ai koe ngā tohunga o ona mata ki tāu tama. Ka huri o mātou whakaro ki a rātou mā I tēnei rā. Ka maumahara mātou ki o rātou mahi whakamiharo. Āno te āhua reka a ngā waiwai I runga I ngā maunga o te kai kaui I te rongopai. E kauhau ana I te maunga rongo. Meinga te marama o tō rongopai kia te aho I roto I te ao katoa. Ka aru kia koropiku ai ngā tangata kia koe ngā wāhi katoa I runga I te ingo o te āriki o te rongomau. Āmeni. I thought this was a nice prayer to start with. God of peace and justice, in days gone by you have called many Indigenous leaders, men and women, to lead their people to struggle for justice by peaceful means. May we defend the rights of the powerless and build our communities on the basis of mutual care and love, in the name of God, who is perfect peace. Tuarua me mihi anō a hau ki ngā mana whenua, ngā kaitiaki pai o tēnei rohi o Otipoti taino atu ki ngā rohi katoa o kaitahu whānui. Tuatoru, I want, with respect, to acknowledge our hosts for this annual lecture, the Dunedin Abrahamic Interfaith Group, the Global Migrations Group and the Otago University Tertiary Chaplaincy Team. Yours is such a vitally important work in these increasingly uncertain and volatile times. Together, you represent the critical faith-based pillars necessary for social stability, for human flourishing, and a deep and enduring peace with justice for all. As we know, each one of the Abrahamic faiths implores us to act with and for and in peace. One of my Muslim friends shared with me a beautiful prayer from the Quran at 49:11. Paraphrased in Māori and English, it reads, Tūturu he tuakana, teina ngā tangata whakapono ki a rātou anō, nō reira me hauhau I te rongo ki wainganui o koutou tuakana teina, me te wehi ki a ala, ki a tohungi a koutou. Translated, as I said, or paraphrased really, surely all believers are brothers. So make peace between one another and fear Allah, that mercy may be shown to you. I was raised with what is known to Māori as Te Rawiri. This was the original Māori Anglican prayer book. Central to this precious taonga karakia are the Psalms, because these were among the first, some of the first biblical texts to be translated into Māori. Their significant and enduring influence was assured. When translated in the early 1830s, they assumed a tremendous depth of meaning because the indigenous language of the time was so powerfully evocative of the same imagery, symbolism, pain, and beauty inherent in the original lament-laden messages of the Psalms themselves. Remember, this is just preceding the times when Māori were to be systematically relieved of land, of language and resources. The times when diseases against which Māori had no immunity would soon begin to take their toll. As the full devastating impact of colonisation began to impact Māori, ironically and yet understandably, the Psalms especially provided boundless solace. They encouraged my ancestors to stay faithful and to believe that deliverance lay ultimately in their willingness to abide by the rules for right living, in obedience to God, irrespective of the suffering they were experiencing. I can still remember as a child listening to the elders chanting the Psalms, especially one such as 29:11. This is the one which reminds us all that the Lord blesses his people with peace. Kia ho mai e hua he kaha ki tāna hunga, he rongo mau tā ihua mana ki tāna hunga. And so it's completely unsurprising that as the years have gone by, Māori have continued to invoke the same faith-filled yearning for peace, and in our contemporary interfaith context, to see our contemporary greeting, kia tau te rangimarie, as being akin to the greetings of our sisters and brothers, assalamu alaikum and shalom aleichem. Kia tau te rangimarie is a beautiful, gentle, spiritually enshrined sentiment. It's a sentiment which at once both implores and affirms the rightness of peace as the substantive basis of blessed and just relationships. In various religiously framed iterations, the sentiment itself is widely used throughout Aotearoa by most faith-based institutions. Kia tau te rangimarie is thus offered by Māori into the public discourses on how and why it is good and honourable for us all to carry within us this seed or kakano, which inclines us always toward essential human goodness. Every utterance of these words implies a simple and sincere, heartfelt yearning that God's peace will pervade our innermost impulses for human connection and thus will guide and inform our ways of interacting with one another, our ways of understanding one another, and perhaps most importantly, these words will and ought guide and inform our faith-filled instinct for ensuring justice for all. Because I grew up at a time in Aotearoa when the church and the marae were ascendant in Māori communities, then these words are ingrained in me, but more so their deep meaning and the faith-based praxis implicit in that meaning. It was in this way that my experience of whānau and community, and thus my formative instincts for all relationships, were premised on this simple little saying, kia tau te rangimarie. It was only when as a child growing up in urban communities far removed from my whānau that I began to worry. I began to worry because for the first time I saw my mother, my stunningly beautiful, talented, articulate, kind-hearted Te Rarawa mother, being spoken to harshly, being publicly humiliated for no good reason, apart from being Māori. I saw her hold to her own mana and I saw her tears, but she did not retort. And then it began to happen to me. The snide, racist remarks about my kumara appearance, my rubber lips, about how it must be the Pākehā half of me that was clever and that was good at sports, but neither was ever good enough for me to be chosen as a captain, and certainly never ever good enough for me to be considered for any leadership role in the school. As a young teenager, I did not at that time apprehend my own mana, and initially at least I was too well-mannered to retort. Certainly, however, my earliest apprehensions of kia tau te rangimarie were fast receding. I was a more mature teenager through the 60s and early 70s, the years when Māori activism began to impact irrevocably upon this nation. Activism born of too many years of injustice, activism born of too many years of colonial oppression. I found my radical niche very early on, and somehow knowing intuitively that my faith nevertheless compelled me to stand up for redemptive justice. The Land March, the establishment of the Waitangi Tribunal, Bastion Point, the Haka Party at Auckland University, Waitangi Day protests, the Māori language petition, my family home became a microcosm of the national struggle to reconcile the rising tensions between the descendants of those who had seized power and resources by force and legislative stealth, and those who had all along been willing to share both and to live peaceably alongside one another. Those who, through no fault of our own, were by then living the legacy of disenfranchisement from land, language, marae, and whānau. My Te Raroa mother was urging me on in my fledgling activist instincts. My Pākehā father was urging restraint, good manners, and the avoidance of conflict at all costs. Kia tau te rangimarie, my daughter, is what he would largely unsuccessfully urge upon me. I won't bore you by continuing the chronology of my life. Suffice to say, my scholarship and my professional career in the intervening years, I have always tried to be attentive and responsive to the moral and thus political dilemma invariably at the heart of racial, gender, economic injustice. I am a completely inadvertent theologian. Never in my wildest imaginings did I ever consider I would ever be a student of theology, much less a teacher of it. In my early theological studies, however, I was so blessed to sit at the feet of those trained in the Mary Knoll tradition, and then later I was drawn to the teachings and writings of those staunch Latin American and black liberation theologians and activists, Jesuits especially. They gave me the theological language of social, political, and gender justice. They gave legitimacy to my protest instincts, and they were unequivocally encouraging and empowering and emphatic that together we have a job to do. Here in Aotearoa, also a very small number of Māori, as mainstream Christian church leaders, also subscribed to the faith-based urgings of those globally iconic, wonderfully, radically compassionate thinkers, teachers and activists, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, Gustavo Gutierrez, Jesse Jackson. And it was these very few Māori clerics who ultimately aligned themselves with the original, the very courageous early Māori activist groups and individuals. In so doing, most of these leaders concurrently misaligned themselves with the leaders of their respective denominational churches, who did not approve of this unseemly mix of what they described as radical politics and faith. Clearly, those institutional leaders must in some way have held the same dim view of Jesus, who by all reputable accounts was a model, unapologetic radical activist, an unequivocal peace builder, but with an unerring eye for injustice. During my postgraduate studies, now as you've heard almost 30 years ago, I had moved into theological educational leadership. And initially I was so incredibly excited at the prospect of bringing my new learnings into what I later described as a 150-year-old, colonially inspired, patriarchally encrusted Anglican theological college, crying out for radical transformation. The institution was not in the least impressed with my stance, and ultimately, in spite of my best efforts to prove myself as a dedicated scholar, researcher, as an internationally reputable advocate and activist for peace with justice, as an active ecumenist and a very early advocate for interfaith studies, an enduring black mark was subsequently entered beside my name. Anyway, let me turn to 2003. 2003 is the year immediately prior to the inaugural Peace Lecture. That year, now 20 years ago, saw in Aotearoa the foreshore and seabed debacle unfold, which gave rise to unprecedented levels of public protest and led directly to the subsequent formation of the Māori Party. The Whale Rider was released to great public acclaim and an absolute dearth of critical analysis. Māori television was set to be launched. Ngāti Awa and Ngāti Tūwharetoa treaty claims were ostensibly settled. The government released a new Māori language strategy document entitled Te Rautaki Reo. It's an absolutely brilliant aspirational policy document which is lurching now somewhat precariously towards its projected fulfilment in 2028. And you will all recall, I am sure, that Māori were declared to be just 16.5 of the newly recorded 4 million people in Aotearoa, New Zealand in 2003. Also in 2003, about 5 times as many Māori as Pākehā were apprehended, prosecuted and convicted, and Māori accounted for 51% of male prison inmates and 58% of female prison inmates, well in excess of our 16.5% in the population. Furthermore, health, educational, socioeconomic and gendered inequities for Māori loomed large across every statistical indicator of life in Aotearoa. Surely there can be no question, therefore, that peace, by any cultural, moral, spiritual, indeed any intellectual definition, simply could not be seen writ large in the lives of Māori in 2003, and neither, I will argue, is it yet so in 2023. Worse, given the current increasingly virulent anti-Māori pre-election sentiments abroad in Aotearoa, and given some fairly recent, extraordinarily turbulent history in our nation, then the chances of us being able to say, let alone to feel, tau te rangimarie, with confidence, let alone with compassion or aroha, is becoming more and more forlorn. It would not be an understatement to say that race politics, race baiting, anti-tiriti, anti-Māori leadership, authority, autonomy, are today intensifying in scale and in savagery. As we turn toward the general election, now just weeks away, I cannot overstate the levels of fear abroad that someday soon a random, unhinged actor will act on the racist rhetoric to deadly effect. Certainly, this is becoming an increasingly frightening time for those of us who are wahine and who are in any kind of leadership role, especially in the secular world. Look at how the Honourable Kiritapu Allen, an incredibly competent, fearless, visionary politician, was so cruelly and relentlessly vilified at a time of deep personal vulnerability. Look at how she was so readily publicly demonised, blatantly lied about after a no-harm car crash, and even today, no one has publicly retracted the widespread lie that the police used tracker dogs to find her after the accident. What about MP Marama Davidson, Have you seen the shocking video taken at the time she was deliberately struck on a pedestrian crossing? In broad daylight in Auckland's busy domain by one of Brian Tamaki's slavishly obedient foot soldiers. What about Moana Maniapoto, who makes the most stunning award-winning documentary programs? Have you ever had occasion to read the public comments posted after every single one of her measured, intelligent, fearless journalistic forays into the critical issues of our times? Issues which are arguably systemically and certainly attitudinally precluding any prospect of a just and enduring peace for Māori and thus more broadly for Aotearoa. What about her worship Mayor Tory Whānau? Oh, how certain media went into an absolute frenzy over her supposedly utterly egregious decision to bring her dog, her pet, her companion to work. Let alone how vilified she was for doing what I guarantee we've all had inadvertent occasion to do, to forget to pay for a restaurant meal. After either being distracted by the joy of breaking bread and drinking fine wine with good friends, or being confused about what the payment arrangement is among friends, or simply being too tired that we just forgot. Elizabeth Kerikeri, the Honourable Debbie Ngarewa Peka, Lady Tureti Moxon, Nanaia Mahuta, outstanding leaders all, and all being targeted with hate speech, with violent, abusive messaging to do with their appearance, their pro-Māori obsessions, their so-called lack of credibility, and so on it goes, and all of it to the largest extent anonymous, of course. This is not measured, intelligent, dare I say, respectful disagreement. This is just outright cowardly and increasingly vicious, racist hatred. Now, I know there are some who will say, oh, well, this is all merely coincidental. The fact that all of these examples have Māori women at their centre is not in any way indicative of a concerted racist campaign to discredit, disparage, and ultimately to literally disempower Māori. Well, if that was all there is going on in Aotearoa, then maybe, just maybe, you could mount a successful argument along those lines. But of course, this is just a minuscule list of what is actually going on, and more broadly, and in my view, without sufficient legal restraint. I travel quite regularly, and so it is with deep sadness that I now regularly encounter Air New Zealand staff who tell me they are regularly verbally abused on flights and off for using te reo. And this has now gone beyond the very visible eye-rolling during the safety video to actual confrontation, especially from passengers when disembarking. Just a week or so ago, I went searching in Auckland for some of that Whittaker's chocolate with the te reo Māori packaging. I wanted to give some as gifts for my overseas colleagues. I cannot repeat some of the responses I received when I asked in various supermarkets for the chocolate wrapper written in te reo. What about the Ku Klux Klan fancy dresses at the Kaimai School fundraiser just over a month ago? What about the jaw-dropping idiocy of a certain senior politician whose very recent announcement about Māori not being Indigenous was also gleefully seized upon by some in the mainstream media as being akin to a newfound gospel truth? What about the truly incendiary behaviour being undertaken and the vile propaganda being readily distributed around Aotearoa by Julian Batchelor and his anti-Tiriti, anti-co-governors, acolytes and cronies? What we have from this group are blatant, racist untruths being promulgated far and wide with potentially dangerous consequences. In case you haven't been blessed with an invitation to attend one of his roadshow hui, let me save you the bother. For here, according to Batchelor, is the definition you've all been waiting for. Co-governance is code for the takeover of New Zealand by tribal companies and their representatives. The end of democracy. the installation of apartheid and separatism into everyday life, eventually leading to a full-blown government by tribal rule. By and large, as people who live within, or at least who belong to communities of faith, I invite us, ask ourselves, does that definition sound right? Is this how you have experienced marae, whare wānanga, whare karakia? Is this how you have experienced Māori as your friends, your colleagues, your whānau? Is this how you understand Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which provides, in my view, the original template for building a peaceful and just society? As Bishop Manu Bennett reminds us, Te Tiriti is a promise of two peoples to take the best possible care of each other. I want to echo his sentiments by adding, please don't worry if you don't know the clauses, the nuanced history, the legal status of Te Tiriti. Just know it was intended to provide a framework for peaceful, mutually agreed coexistence between tangata whenua and those who arrived later and who were also wanting to make a new home for themselves here in Aotearoa. Co-governance is thus a relational model premised on Te Tiriti principles of mutuality and interdependence. The only prerequisites for making the model work are kindness, compassion, fairness, humility, courage, ethical standards. What we see within those organisations and entities where co-governance is working well, and there are some, are easy, effective, mutually respectful, mutually enjoyable, equitable relationships. And why? Because co-governance is not about asset ownership, it's about the partnership relationship necessary for responsible governance or stewardship. So what does all of this have to do with us here and now? Well, you may recall earlier I did say the words, together we have a job to do. I haven't spoken as I have this evening for the sake of merely fulfilling a promise to contribute to the annual Peace Lecture, but rather by way of sharing with you that I've thought very deeply about what it is in Aotearoa today which is undermining, threatening, and precluding that deep inner peace I believe the faith-filled human heart so instinctively yearns for. I am Māori, I am a woman, and more importantly, as you've heard, I am the fiercely protective grandmother of 15 absolutely fabulous, talented, kind-hearted, generous-spirited young mokopuna, all of whom are Māori and most of whom are also Pasifika. I am determined they will not have their pathways in life restricted, threatened, or delimited by those who consider their humanity less worthy, less deserving, less capable. Clearly, given all I have just described and given the irrefutable evidence that racism in Aotearoa is right now being deliberately and very dangerously politically incited by a range of actors, then my mokopuna are potentially at risk, and I will not stand by idly and wait for them to be wounded by it. I have deliberately raised up the issues affecting Māori both historically and in our times, because from my read of the past 20 years of these lectures, there has never been a focus upon the myriad ways in which peace by any definition remains such an elusive possibility for the first people of this land. What saddens me more is that it has taken the heart and the voice of a wahine Māori to raise these up, especially when we collectively as peoples of faith, we know that when one among us is stumbling, then the collective remains unstable. For it occurs to me that if we are failing or even inadvertently choosing not to notice the plight of tangata whenua, then what about all those in our nation who are also right now profoundly vulnerable, including especially my Muslim sisters and brothers, my LGBTQ sisters and brothers, my migrant sisters and brothers, all of whom also have a human right, a legal right, or indeed a birthright to be in this land and to live lives characterised by dignity, freedom, and decency. My urging, therefore, is for us to mobilise ourselves with profound urgency, to identify, to strategise and to act more closely together as peoples of faith to push back against the obvious sources of enduring harm to those already systemically disadvantaged. We have to get much smarter, much braver, more visible, and much, much more radical in our thinking and in our anti-racism being and doing. I do want to mention my admiration for the courage and determination of many of my Pākehā colleagues here at Otago University for their efforts in this regard. In the past few years of my tenure here, I have witnessed and experienced their allyship with deep admiration and with gratitude. They are the ones now challenging systemic racism, confronting structural injustice, advocating for the transformations needed to give full, authentic effect to policies and practices reflective of treaty-based equity outcomes. They are the ones, therefore, also bearing the brunt of an endless barrage of criticism, vilification, threats to their professional status, and subsequently to their well-being. And so to all my professional colleagues, many of you now as treasured friends, I salute you for the example that you are setting among our peers in other universities across Aotearoa. Advocacy for the moral right has always been costly. We know that. It comes with our faith-based lifetime subscriptions. But I do think we have become unduly passive over time, for how else could we have even inadvertently overlooked the relentlessly elusive prospects of peace for tangata whenua here in Aotearoa? Now, I have not come with a 10-point plan for addressing the issues, for this is what we are required to work out together. In closing, however, what I do have are just a couple of urgings to help us begin that new journey together. Firstly, that becoming tiriti literate becomes mandatory for all within faith-based communities, because then we would all realise that te tiriti, like most legal treaties, is in fact the most effective organisational tool at our immediate disposal for achieving equity. We would soon realise, however, you cannot achieve equity-based justice by applying te tiriti within an existing inequitable system. First things first, institutional transformation thus becomes imperative. As the inimitable Tina Ngata reminds us, it is in its ubiquity that the power of racism rests. It is in the systems that refuse to accept its presence, even in the face of it, which allow racism to not only be maintained, but to proliferate. And further, it is the society and organisations which always point to others, but never to themselves, that fail to dismantle it and permit its presence as the default experience for everyone who isn't white. Secondly, that we take to heart the critical teachings left by Moana Jackson. Exemplary, gentle man, an outstanding tiriti exponent. Treaties, he reminded, are not settled, they are honoured. In so saying, he corrected the commonly asserted and utterly incorrect Crown mantra to do with full and final settlement. This is a phrase forced into all treaty negotiations, and all it does is fuel the racist assumption that somehow Māori are getting more than our financial share from the government coffers. Perhaps Moana's greatest gift and challenge, however, to tangata tiriti was to require honesty about the situation and to be willing to change. He made us understand that Māori being able to live as Māori in our own country is essential for peace and justice, and that tangata tiriti must face up to how they are preventing this from happening. I can picture Moana saying in that beautiful, gentle, deliberate way he spoke, that courage and bravery are just the deep breath taken before starting something difficult. And so my closing question to us all, are we as peoples of faith ready to take that deep breath together? Surely, as with Maya Angelou, we know that history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, it need not be lived again. So, friends, I have a short poem from Maya Angelou for our collective consideration, and ultimately, I pray someday soon it will be for our speaking one to another. We, angels and mortals, believers and non-believers, look heavenward and speak the word aloud. Peace. We look at our world and we speak the word aloud. Peace. We look at each other, then into ourselves, and we say without shyness or apology or hesitation, peace, my brother. Peace, my sister. Peace, my soul. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, thank you so much for that. Thank you for your truth. Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for the bravery that you've shown, not just in this, but in all of your life. Desmond Tutu is the one who said reconciliation begins with speaking the truth. However it is to hear, it is what must be spoken. So we thank you for that. I'm going to invite our panel forward to come and sit here with me. So Shari, Jamin and Greg. So it is our tradition at these peace lectures of late to have some panellists from the three Abrahamic faiths represented, Christianity, Judaism and Islam, to speak something from their perspective on the topic of the evening. So I will get them to introduce themselves and then to share some insights from their own faith tradition. I must emphasize that while our panelists represent specific faith groups, they do not speak on behalf of every member of their faith. They are individuals with unique perspectives shaped by their religion. So even if you identify with one of these faith traditions, it's okay not to agree with everything they say. We celebrate the beautiful diversity found with and among each religion. After hearing from these panelists, we'll open the floor to questions. So I invite you to consider what you've found most intriguing and enlightening from each presentation. And we all look forward to fruitful questions that continue this conversation. I will invite Jamin to introduce himself and share his perspective. You may stay there if you want.
Stay here? No, I need to. I think I need to. Yeah. You're right there. Even better. Does that work? Okay, everyone can hear me? Okay. On? Okay. Ko ngā manuhiri, me ngā hoa mahi o te whare wānanga o tākau tēnā koutou. Dr. Jenny Tepa Daniel, who is, there you are. Tēnā koe. Ko Jamin Halberstadt toko ingoa, ko te tūmoa ki aho o te tare whakamatau hinenkaro. Maururu koe mo te tono mai I aho ki te whakauru I tēnei rā. I am Jamin Halberstadt. I am head of the psychology department, local Jewish guy. Those are my qualifications. I want to thank you for inviting me, though, to participate. It's really an honor to share the stage with my colleagues and with Jenny, if it's okay if I call you Jenny. Okay, I've been asked to provide the Jewish response, although Greg Houston, one of the visionaries behind this lecture series, was quick to qualify that I shouldn't speak for anyone but myself. That's good because Jews are noted for differences of opinion. There's an old joke, I'm terrible at telling jokes, but there's an old joke, Jewish guy goes sailing, gets in a shipwreck all alone on a desert island. Years later, he's discovered by someone, and the person wants to take a tour of the island where the person's been all these years. He says, what's that big building there with the Jewish star on top? And the guy says, oh, that's the synagogue where I go to pray. And he says, what, really? Well, what's that other big building right next door? It also has a Jewish star on top. He says, oh, that's the synagogue I'd never set foot in. So I won't go into the rich Jewish perspective on justice and prejudice, the principle, for example, of tikkun olam, that's a moral obligation to repair the world, or Jews' own history of oppression and, yes, unfortunately, oppressors that hopefully give Jewish people a unique empathic perspective on suffering. And I won't even mention that we happen to be sitting in the middle of the holiest period in the Jewish calendar, the Days of Atonement. That's when between Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, and Yom Kippur, Jews are instructed to reflect and seek forgiveness from people they've wronged. These are all relevant to what you've said today, but there are more opinions on these things than there are Jews. So Greg just said to speak from the heart, and I'll give it a go. Jenny, what I really loved about your talk is that although this event is sponsored by the faith leaders, which I guess I am nominally one, you've talked, a lot about your own experience and your own religious upbringing and values. I think your message seems to really transcend faith. And in fact, after sort of listening to your talk, I guess I sort of take away that, that we should go away not trying to introspect about what our faith tells us, but, about what we think is right. I actually do think that you can't adjudicate right and wrong from people's faith. So like moral psychologist, I am a psychology researcher. So moral psychologists will tell you that moral principles are intuitive, and atheists, like me, I'm sorry to say, share pretty much the same general intuitions as religious believers. So, Jenny, the people who abused you and your family, and those who continue to disrespect Tāngata Whenua and anyone else, for that matter, those people are mean, frightened ignoramuses, but probably not faithless. We don't have to rely on authority, even religious or otherwise authority, to value equity and fairness, I think. And that includes, I think, the treaty, if you'll forgive this oblique critique of our sacred document. I agree the treaty embodies the principles that you're talking about, and I believe that Pākehā have historically violated them. But I also think if there were no treaty, that I don't think any of us here would think that the situation that you described is any more acceptable. And if it's not acceptable without the treaty, then it's clear that the treaty, it is an organizational tool, but it's not the moral force behind the work that we have to do. And that's why I'm really grateful for your sort of, I don't know, brutalist take on the treaty. You said, don't worry if you don't know the clauses, the history, the legal status, just know it was intended to provide a framework for peaceful, mutually agreed coexistence between Tangata Whenua and those who arrived later and who were also wanting to make a new home for themselves in Aotearoa. And I love this because it kind of cuts right to the chase, taps into our moral intuitions, independent of the particular intellectual or faith-based edifice that we have built around those intuitions. It's in some ways, I hope this isn't going too far, but I think it's resonant of this famous story about Hillel. Hillel the Elder is a famous Jewish scholar. I'm sure you've heard of him. Contemporary of Jesus. They may even have had coffee together. Nobody actually knows. Legend has it that Hillel was challenged to explain the entirety of the Torah, right? First 5 books of the Old Testament. Challenged to explain the entirety of the Torah while standing on one leg, right? And what he said was, that which is hateful to you, don't do to your neighbor. That's the whole of the Torah. The rest is commentary. And your summary of the treaty, I sort of felt was kind of along the same lines, and in a way just as pithy. If we were all determined that we would not let anyone's pathway in life be restricted, threatened, or delimited by those who consider their humanity less worthy, less deserving, or less capable, then wouldn't all the rest be commentary? And finally, I do want to agree with your assessment of our collective efforts here in the Peace Lectures over the past 20 years. I haven't been able to attend all of them. The ones I have to admit, have tended to focus on peace among the Abrahamic faiths or on the international stage. Sometimes forgetting that we don't live on the international stage, we live in Aotearoa. And when we have engaged with issues, I think we have been a little too genteel, and it's kind of refreshing to hear someone who's angry, although you weren't as angry as when I read it, but still angry and willing to say so. So I thank you for calling out our myopia, and also on calling on us to do better. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Kia ora. Kia tau te rangimarie e. O nā mihi ki a koe e te marae kura, tino miharo te kōrero. I love what you point out. Together we have a job to do. I like that word together, because I couldn't do it on my own. Neither all of us couldn't do it on our own. I wanted to share with you my story because listening to Jenny's story, a little bit different, but I could see some similarities in there. So, ko Shari Roy tōku ingoa, no te tai tokarau, nā pui, te rāroa, Waikato tainui, nā te mutinga, nā te tama. So I am one of the Māori chaplains here at Otago University and also at Te Pukenga. I've been in Dunedin for 27 years. Well, in the South Island for 27 years. Most of that time living in Dunedin. I live in Milton now, married to Chris Roy. I have 2 beautiful adult children. And 2 days ago, I became a fiercely protective nana. My mokopuna, her name is Aotearoa. Aotearoa means like the breaking of the dawn. And she represents in our whānau hope. I want to tell you a little bit about my mokopuna. Her mother, my daughter, we whāngaid her, she's Cook Island and Māori. And she met the love of her life in Tamaki Makaurau in Auckland, and he is from England. I love my son-in-law. Cam is his name. His parents came over on Waitangi Day, or actually day before Waitangi Day, to New Zealand. They hadn't seen their son for 3 years. My husband and I were so excited about his parents coming. We wanted to show manaakitanga to this family from England because we loved our son-in-law and we wanted to extend that manaakitanga and that aroha to his whānau. Interesting thing, his parents asked me, they said, you must have been pretty disappointed or pretty angry that our son, took your daughter. I said, what makes you say that? You colonised and everything, and being from England, their perspective of Māori here is downtrodden, suppressed and colonised. And my husband and I said to them, we love your son, and as part of our whānau, you are now one with us. When they came to our house, we just got to know them. We were setting up for kai. Before we had kai, I said, before we have kai, because my son-in-law told me emphatically they were not believers, they were atheists, with a bit of whakapapa to Catholics. So I said, before we have kai, I just need to mihi to you. So I mihi to them in te reo. And in my karakia to them, I said, thank you, God, for bringing to making a safe journey for them to come to our shores. And then I prayed for kai. When I opened my eyes, I looked at my son's parents, and tears were streaming down their faces. And they said, normally when we come to people's places for dinner, we just eat. But in this case, they were really in awe of how Māori show manaakitanga and aroha. The next day was Waitangi Day, and we took them to Ōtākau Marae. That was a feast for them. They had no idea. They were just enthralled by the activity, the joy, the kapahaka, the singing. And every second person, as we were kind of making our way to the marae, we'd hongi or, hug or kihi somebody. And they'll say, a lot of people here, but Māori, it's a small community in Dunedin, we all know each other. But they were just enthralled to the point that they were looking at real estate by about day 3. And now that they're in England right now, but their mokopuna has arrived. They were absolutely ecstatic that their mokopuna, which they call moko, has a Māori name. They were just so excited because they want so much to be connected. Because when we had whanaungatanga, manaakitanga at our house, they went away feeling so loved, so connected, so together. And so listening to Whaia's kōrero, together we have a job to do. My upbringing has a lot of trauma in it. And I wanted to talk about that trauma because I think it's important. The trauma of, as a little girl at school, being told to sit in the corner because I couldn't answer the teacher in class because I didn't know what was going on. I mean, I'm an English speaker, I didn't speak te reo Māori, but it was just that it was just so foreign to me. Having a Pākehā boy come up and say, "You're dirty. You've got dirt all over you." And my dad seeing me with a scrubbing brush, scrubbing the dirt off. The trauma I'm talking about even goes before. It's a whakapapa that has come down to me. My grandfather was beaten for speaking the reo, and so he made a promise to himself that when he has children and when he has mokopuna, we're going to be English speakers and we're going to live in the Pākehā world. because that is the road to success. And so as a little girl, and as I was going through high school, in my mind's eye, I thought that the pathway to peace or success was to live like the Pākehā. I married a Pākehā. His name's Chris Roy, and I like to think God had a good sense of humour when I married my husband, because out of all the Pākehā I could marry, I married the most Māori one. He's got no Māori blood in him whatsoever, but his nākau, his heart was for Māori. When he was a little boy, he wanted to be Māori. When I was a little girl, I wanted to be Pākehā. And then when we met, the two of us together became one. And so my husband has been a staunch supporter of things Māori. When all my nephews got into trouble with the law, I'll say that quietly, who would they come to? They would come to my Pākehā husband, because they trusted him. He showed them all their, since they were little pepe, right up till they were young, that this Pākehā was a person that they could trust. And so they would go to him for help. And because my husband, the way he was able to advocate on behalf of Māori in front of judges, in front of police, in front of places where Māori feel whakamā. My strength comes from two things: te rangimarie me te aroha. They come from my tupuna. Even though I grew up in a non-religious home, I grew up knowing that peace and love were really important. When I took on the role as Māori chaplain, I was asked, what are the two values that you hold dear, or what are the things that you bring to Māori chaplaincy? And I thought, te rangimarie me te aroha. In everything I do, when I meet my students, meet staff, or even meet anyone in the community, it doesn't have to be here at the university, people are worried, people are hurt, people are concerned. And me as a Māori, wahine, Christian, what I can offer the people is peace. The peace that comes from God. Going back to when I was a young girl and living a life of trauma, I lived in a life of chaos and conflict. The best groundwork for me to learn about peace. I craved it. I craved peace. I didn't become a Christian until I was 25, through my Pākehā husband. Up until, from a young age up till 25, I thought I had to drum up peace. I had to drum up aroha. At the age of 25, I realised it comes from te atua. So what motivates me today in everything I do, leading my family, doing my mahi, it's aroha from God that motivates me to go out and be brave and be courageous, to meet with you, kanohi ki te kanohi, face to face, because sometimes that's a hard thing to do, but also recognise the God in you and recognise the pain in you. And that's when the te rangimarie, the peace comes, the peace that comes from God that surpasses all understanding. I want to mention a wahine who came to our school when I was at intermediate, Ngāpuri Te Raroa, Whina Cooper. Everyone knows Whina Cooper? When she, during the land march, I was living in Wellington, and I remember watching her on TV, and my family were actually they weren't activists. They saw these Māori there, and they were like, oh, they think that's a good idea. And I remember thinking, what is this all about? Because I didn't understand about the treaty, didn't understand about what been colonised. But I remember at intermediate, I loved intermediate. We had a school, Raumanga Intermediate. We had a school that were half and half, Māori and Pākehā. And one of the things Whina said when she was up on stage and she was looking at our beautiful faces, she said, "Oh, tino atahua o kanohi," beautiful faces. And she encouraged us, she said, "I see Māori, Pākehā, Māori, Pākehā." There was no division. There was no Māori over here or Pākehā over here. I was proud to be at that school because we interacted so easily. And she said the way of the future is Māori, Pākehā, Māori, Pākehā, Māori, Pākehā. Maybe that's where I got the idea to marry a Pākehā. I want to end with one thing that popped out through Whaia's kōrero. In times of conflict and hurt and pain, you hear all these true sad stories, what happened to me and my people. You know, we can be offended. We can get angry. But from the age of 25 until now, I won't tell you how old I am, but it's been a long time, the Lord's taught me about forgiveness. And that's held me in great stead in lots of things. And I would urge to look at forgiveness. And forgiveness will drive aroha. Along with aroha will come te rangimarie, the peace. And just like my new in-laws from England, when they feel the manaakitanga, the aroha, we come together as one, and together we have a job to do, whānau. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to all of you. I'd first like to thank the speaker Whaia for beautiful words, really an inspiring kōrero that we all can take a lot from. I'll briefly, introduce myself. My name is George or Shafi, a Muslim name. A lot of us who convert to Islam like to take one. It's optional, but that's the way it is. And I liked the joke that my friend here told, so I'll give one along very similar lines that I was told recently. What do you get when you have two Muslims in a room? 3 opinions on the moon sighting. So, with that out of the way, I think we'll move on. So, we've had, for this theme of this talk, these greetings of peace. And as you saw when I opened this talk, and as you'll probably know if you've ever interacted with a Muslim, the greeting of Assalamu alaikum is very, very core to us. I gave one hadith or saying of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam last time I was here. I'll give a new one about that greeting. So we have a hadith which is relayed by Al-Bukhari in his Adab al-Mufrad, so a guide of Islamic ethics, Islamic how we behave in society. It's judged as Hasan by Al-Albani for those who keep track. And so what do we get from that? What we get is that when you're giving this greeting of peace, it is you are actively praising the divine, you're actively bringing the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala into your conversations, into everything it is that you do. And I think the metaphor which was given of te kākon, or the seed, is beautiful because we believe the same thing. When you greet someone, Assalamu alaikum, greet a gathering. If you leave, you also say Assalamu alaikum. Any goodness, any khair which comes from this conversation after you've left, you still gain a share of that reward because you've made this greeting of Assalamu alaikum. But what is salam? If we take salam, we take peace to be a divine aspect, then it is entwined with every other one of God, every one of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's aspects. And what are these aspects? As was actually brought throughout this speech, justice. Peace and justice are therefore definitively linked. And we, in Islam, we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-adl, He's the most just. And it says in the Quran, in verse 8 of Surah Teen, أَلَيْسَ اللَّهُ بِأَحْكَمُ الْحَاكِمِينَ, and is not God the most just, the most wise of all judges? And so for Muslims, when we get our idea of justice, we get our idea of peace, we take this all from our faith. And so while I would, in the interest of being able to fly, I'm not going to say that Islam is a religion of radical political action, as has been the terminology used today. It is. Islam is a religion which, from the start, from the life of our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is a religion which has struggled for justice. This was a man who, for the first 10 years of his life, lived in the most horrendous of repression. His followers were tortured. He was tortured. There was no goodness in much of the society which he faced, and yet he persevered. And just because of the timing of this talk, which is just after a festival celebrated by certain sectors of the Muslim community of Arba'in, where we remember the sacrifice, which all Muslims recognize. It's celebrated differently by different quadrants of our community. But the death of Hussein ibn Ali, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who died again seeking this justice, seeking to stand up for the truth and what is right in society. So this is in the very roots of our faith, is to always stand for the truth and always stand for justice in all societies. And what is the justice that Islam preaches? It is a justice which is racial. If we look at the final sermon of the Prophet ﷺ, he said, all of mankind is from Adam and Eve alayhi salam. An Arab has no superiority over a non-Arab, nor a non-Arab any superiority over an Arab. Also, a white has no superiority over a black, nor a black has any superiority over a white, except by piety and good action. So we aren't judged by our skin, we're not judged by who we are judged by what we are, what we do, who we are in the society. And we have another narration which really deals with this issue of racial hatred, with racist speech, which states, there's a hadith which goes along the lines of, whoever insults a man by slandering his whole people. So whoever, says the racial slur, whoever says, oh, all you X are Y, whoever does that, he is the greatest liar. And this is narrated in Sunan Ibn Majah, and it is sahih. But it's also one which stands against, for example, ableism. We have the example of the noble companion Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, radiallahu an, a small man, like myself. I'm not going to claim his stature in the eyes of God, but a small man. He had very small legs. And one time, some of the other companions were laughing at him, laughing at his legs. He was up climbing a tree. He was doing some chores. He was helping collect some resources. They were laughing at him. And when the Prophet ﷺ saw them laughing, he said, why are you laughing? They said, look at his legs. Like, come on now, they're tiddly. And what he said is, by the one whose hand is my soul is in, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those hands will both be heavier on the scale, so on the Day of Judgment, than the mountain of Uhud, which is, I don't know how many of you had the blessing of visiting that holy place, but it's a big mountain. So again, it doesn't matter who we are born as, it matters what we do. It's a religion of economic justice, and if you'll just excuse me. So Abu Darda, another companion of the Prophet ﷺ, reported that he ﷺ said, seek out the vulnerable for me, for you are only given provision and divine support due to your care for the vulnerable. So if we're not looking after the vulnerable in our society, we are not getting any support from God. That is what we are placed on earth to do. Again, this is a sahih hadith. And also, and this brings us to the discussion of tetiriti, it calls for the respect of agreements, even those which have been carried out outside of an Islamic framework. So there's another saying of our Prophet ﷺ that was said in reference to the Hilf al-Fuda, which was an agreement of some of the elites of Makkah before his time, where they essentially agreed to support each other in protecting the oppressed against the oppressors. And what he said when he knowing of this was, if I were called to it now, in the age of Islam, I would respond. And what he also said was, any agreement which is good is not abrogated by Islam, it is merely strengthened. So, when we look at Te Tiriti, we see that these values which it stresses, these values which it protects, are the same values of ours. The first article on kawanatanga, so governments, this is something Islam does recognize. We're told to obey, first and foremost, we obey Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, we obey His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then we obey those in authority amongst us. And if we look at how the leaders, the leaders of the iwi came together to agree to and have these discussions around Te Tiriti, around choosing a sovereign, we actually see this reflects the election, the processes which were used to decide on who would succeed Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When those leaders in our society at the time came together, deliberated and decided on who they believed was most able to give that protection, most able to give that to protect the rights which God has given us. Then Article 2 about rangatiratanga. This is actually an area where Islam and Māori society, we have quite a similar idea. We don't really have that idea of inalienable private property, of owning land, but of stewardship. Land belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're told that everything which is in the heavens and the earth belongs to Him. In Surah Yunus, verse 10, and we made you vice regents in the land after them to see how you would act. So this land, this ownership of land is merely we are vice regents, we are looking after this as a test for our own practice. And then thirdly, Article 3, the preservation of rights. As I spoke earlier, this Islam is about protecting the divine rights of humans, first and foremost to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then to each other. And so, we can, if we look to the Muslim empires, we can see that even with non-Muslim peoples, this was deeply enshrined, that, the societies of Andalus, of Baghdad, of all of these great empires had Christians as viziers, as, major politicians. They had Jews, they had all these peoples coming together, and this protection of rights is essential. And then Article 4, which we don't hear too much about, but which Koro Musa Tokiri, who's a kaumātua from Waikato, who's also a Muslim, very involved in our community, actually told us about, is the protection of faith, the protection of everyone to have their own religious identity and practice and to maintain it, which again is a Quranic injunction. It is something which is protected. Lakum dinukum waliyadin, the final verse of Surah Kafirun. We recognize that. And so, just to wrap up, for Muslims, therefore, this fight for justice is not new to us. This fight to justice is why we are on this earth, and it is mandatory upon all of us to struggle against oppression and to struggle for goodness. And if we look to the Muslim world, there are so many examples of this struggle being acted out, both in the past and in the present. And when we look to how our community has historically worked with tangata whenua, inshallah, this can be a struggle that we can continue to walk hand in hand and to do our bit as tangata tiriti for the most part, although as the fastest growing religion among the Māori people, this is our struggle as much as it is anyone else, because Islam is a faith, it's not a race, evidently, by me being up here. And so, this is something, a cause very dear to our hearts, and inshallah it shall be a successful one. Jazakallah khair. Thank you, everybody.
Let me express my heartfelt gratitude to each of you for your openness, time and care tonight. I wonder if I might ask the esteemed doctor to come and join our panel. I kept a seat warm for you. Firstly, I would like to invite you, if there was any response you wanted to give to what our panellists have said, and then after that I will open up the floor for questions, and Oak will be bringing a microphone around. No, if you've turned your microphone on again, you'll be all good.
Shoot. Is that all right? Okay. Well, mai te wā iau I tamariki ana, me mai ki au o ku tupuna e te wā e mihi atu ki ngā manuhiri, ki ngā kaikarakia, ki ngā tangata whai kōrero, me tū koe ki te kōrero. As a little girl, you're always told if you're going to say something with respect to those who have contributed something really important to the discussion, you stand up to speak to them. You don't sit down. So, my gratitude to the three of you for. You know, it's a little bit scary because they had 3 days of mulling it over, and it's almost like I'm feeling I'm getting marked. I need to know what my grade score is going to be. But I seriously want to thank you so much for engaging with the sentiments that I was, you know, endeavouring to bring for our collective consideration. I mean, one of the lovely things also about our upbringing in the Māori community, rural Māori community, is it wasn't so much an interfaith, but it was certainly there were no strict kind of boundaries around, you know, I only knew that apparently I was an Anglican when somebody said, you know, at the tangi, the last person that says the karakia, that's what that church, but that's the church that person belongs to. So I would watch, you know, and I'd see whether it was the Catholic priest or the Ratana or the Methodist or the Seventh-day Adventist or the Anglican. And so that, you know, I wasn't raised with any sense of strict denominationalism. And as I became an adult and exposed to the world of religions, I just simply applied the same sentiments that, you know, ultimately our faith is a gift entrusted to us by those who love us the most in life, really. The circumstances of our birth are what usually provide our grandparents, our great-grandparents, and so we inherit our faith. And it is a gift. And as with any gift, it's only as precious as it is in our ability to share it with others. So I thank the three of you for the sharing of your gift of faith in such a humble and generous spirited way. Thank you.
So now we can open up for questions. In the interest of not running Oak into the ground, we might start over this side and gradually make our way this way. So would anybody over here like to ask a question of our speaker or any of our panellists?
Well, firstly, thank you all for the most wonderful and inspiring commentary. It's just a joy to hear people thinking and speaking in this way. It seems to fill us, I think, all with some hope. My question is with regard to a program recently run called Origins on Monday and Tuesday of last week by a man known to us, a well-respected Māori presenter, journalist and commentator, Scotty Morrison. It was a wonderful program, and it was full of useful and interesting information, and in many ways a very encouraging program. Towards the end of the second presentation, he said a very interesting thing, which was that Māori have three problems. They are contact, colonialism, and Christianity. And of course I was concerned to hear this. So I wonder, given the centrality of the idea that there is a place to meet, and it lies somewhat in the tenets of Christianity. And for me, Maori Christianity, Maori spirituality is a thing of astonishing beauty. It is of interest that I work closely with the aforementioned Chris Roy and co-presenting in Melbourne Prison some years ago on Maori spirituality to prisoners. But my question is to you, of course, what do we say to Scotty Morrison?
Yeah, if you're clever, you'll pass the microphone fast.
I actually couldn't quite hear. There were three things: contact, colonisation, and Christianity. The three problems. Oh, okay. And yeah, tō what's your question again? What would I say to Scotty Morrison? Yeah, he said it was a problem. I'm not really sure how to answer that one. Do you have this is my sister here. We're both Te Aotearoa and Anglican. But I'm a late blooming Anglican. I became an Anglican about 4 years ago. So, yeah. Oh, kia ora. Here's my other sister over here.
Kukua ke ana, e aua e mapuna mai ana, I roto I te whatu manawa. Mihi atu ki a koe e te marae kura, e a tāhua rawa ki te rongo I o ngā puhitanga I roto I tō mita. Ko tōna matapuna he honu, a ina I a karere ano. Ko tōna matapuna he honu, a ina I a karere ano. He tai tinu, he tai pari, he tai ope, he tai roa, he tai nui, he tai nui, he tai nui. Nō reira, ko te mihi tuatahi ki te kaihanga, nā miao katoa nā wairua I tuku ki a tata katoa. Nā hahi katoa I tuku. Nā tūmanako I tuku ki a tātou. Nō reira, kore e mutu o mātou mihi ki aia. Nā te timatanga, nā te mutunga o ngā mea anō hoki. Nō reira e mihi ana. Tuarua e mihi ana ki ngā tangata kua kōrero hia ki te marae kura I taku taha neira te mihi ki a koe mo tō kaha mo tō tū mo kupu kaha mo mātauranga nōku te waimari e nōku te waimari Tuatahi whānau, I was just admiring our whaia here and saying to my ears, it was so beautiful to hear her ngā puhitanga and her reo. So if you've dwelled in ngā puhi, we have a certain little twang and maybe of a twang that comes out when we kōrero. And we're quite colourful. See how I've just come down here and taken over? Okay, from your one question. And look, I've been sitting there chomping at the bit. And I just want to thank our atua and our tupuna and our Māori of today. I thank us for being the humble beings that we still are. you'll note it wasn't us that spoke about the articles in the treaty. So everything that's belonged to us has always been spoken about by other people. So your question about Scotty Morrison, contact, what was the other one? Colonization and Christianity. God was here before Christians came. God was already here. We already have 3 different faiths here. Māori had our own faith. So we don't need to say anything to Scotty. Whoever wants to patch up as a Christian, patch them up. If they want to patch up as a Muslim, patch them up. If they want to patch up as a atheist, patch them up. Because they need patched up. Nō reira. I don't think our God's a judging God, eh? And that's why we're gifted to have the word in so many styles. It's because mankind is made in so many ways. Is that a good enough answer for you, sir? Or are we going to debate this a little bit further? Engari, I'm not going to give you a chance because I'm going to talk about something else that I wanted to talk about. I'm Ngāpuhi. So this is what we do. Kōrero, kōrero. Engari, when I was coming here this evening, and thank you to Greg and Hilda for the invitation to this beautiful kaupapa. This is the first time I've been in attendance, and I plan on being regular from now on. However, when I left my home, I was like, ka tangia rangi nui, ka te heke ua, hau e heke hoi i ngā ua engari. I go to myself, well, he tohu tērā, that's a sign there. It's not easy. And people who want to create peace on earth, they have to be prepared to do the hard yards. You have to be prepared to be uncomfortable, to get wet, to get cold. And those are the things that I've seen. And then I thought a little bit more as I was driving here about how beautiful is this, that the tears of rangi nui are cleansing us. It's almost like God is already beginning the blessing before we come in here to discuss the most important thing in the world, peace. For nothing else is more important than that. First of all, one must have peace within themselves, because you cannot go out and effect peace in the world if you don't have peace within yourself. Now, always we go through challenges. We all have our own demons that we face, that we battle. But so long as each day we're working to attain peace, then we can be a representative to that. Tiriti. I've got a few things to talk about, but I won't take all night like I do at the marae, because it's kind of different than the marae, but it's still the same. I'm with people of faith, and that's what matters the most. When I was living in Kaikohe, on my marae up there, I never ever thought that I'd return home to live in Dunedin. And Wairua spoke to me in my whare, where I was blessed to watch all different faiths work together. It's called mahi tahi. No one feels like they need to overpower the other one with their karakia because they need to get their faith then higher than somebody else's, because we're all working for the common cause. We are one body made up of many parts working together. When I was sitting at that marae, Wairua spoke to me and said, "Girl, you love your ngāpuhitanga." And I was like, oh yeah. And Wairua said, "Now go home. I want you to go down to Aotearoa marae. And I want you to love all my people the same way that you love your ngāpuhitanga." That's been a challenge. Sometimes I don't even like people. But I still love them, okay? And then Wairua said this, "And don't judge how I bring home each one of my children to me. Just admire." And I've been home 9 years at Aotearoa marae, and God has put God's people to me. And that is why I'm here today. And so, when I talk about the next thing, which is Te Tiriti, not the Treaty of Waitangi, that's a different document. Tupuna Māori never signed the Treaty of Waitangi. They signed Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And in fact, there was a document that was first in time, best in law, that came to this land previous to that, and that was called He Wakaputanga. And that document, that first document, was created by our ancestors who made a collective called He Wakamenenga, who were a collective of rangatira. You see, in the early 1800s, Māori were the majority on this whenua. And our law, not L-O-R-E, L-A-W, our tikanga, that's what governed. And when I listen to all the kōrero today, everybody's talked about a tikanga. They've talked about this thing called tika. Tika is what's true and correct. Now, what's true and correct for you might not be what's true and correct for me. But who's to determine who's true and correct is true and correct? Okay? Now, when we talk about God, we say God is alive and living and God's a wairua. So then, are we not wairua? Our tika, our intuition, our truth inside of us, how clean and clear is that channel? Eh? It is only in clean and clear, it comes through our perspective as well. But we are gifted with tika, and that's what we were governed by as Māori here. We were accountable if we did something wrong or something good, firstly to our family. We didn't have to ring the police, make a complaint, wait for the police to turn up, a few months later, go to court again a few months later after that. What kind of healing process is that? There is no healing in that. But with our tupuna, we had two ways of recompensating things that were done bad and things that were done good. And that was called muru and utu. Now, utu was something positive as well. But if you did something wrong, you were firstly held accountable by your whānau, because we weren't this iwi thing. What is iwi? That's not who we were. We were whānau. When the Te Tiriti o Waitangi was written, that was based on whānau and hapu, not iwi. That's how much education we all need. And even Māori. Ka pai? So it starts with that, learning. There's actually two documents, Te Tiriti o Waitangi and the Treaty of Waitangi. Now in the 1800s, in the early 1800s, when our tupuna were having kōrero about signing the Te Tiriti o Waitangi, they never foreseen that in 10 years, tens of thousands of non-Māori would be living on our whenua. And they never seen that in 20, 30 years, there was going to be up to hundreds of thousands of people. How were we supposed to maintain order with whānau, hapu, when we had all these randoms coming in that didn't abide by the laws that were already there on the land? That was why we needed an agreement. We sought that out. And we already knew about those things because we had what we call tatau pounamu, which are agreements of peace. So I want us to understand the beauty of the land that we live in and the laws that have already been here upon this whenua long before the dropping down of some kind of arm. Nō reira, ko tērā, that's my whakaro to Te Tiriti and the tika that we're all governed by. Our truth, our tika that lives inside of us. Someone says something, if it's not right, we can feel it's not right. Oh, but you're going to be PC, eh? You're going to stay PC and not say anything about it, and therefore allow that root to grow. Chop the roots off, whānau mā. Activate those words that you talk about every Sunday and that you read every day. Clean it up. Don't throw your pearls at the swines. All right? If we're the peacemakers, then it's time to get a little bit rowdy because, we seem to be the quiet ones. And it's chaos and disorder that seems to be reigning out there. The last thing, frequencies. God's all about it. Frequencies. Mihi atu ki a tātou.
Kia ora. Love you, Tanya. Shall I brave one more question? So here? Yep. No.
My children are cringing. They're right here, Manai and Camila, just in case you want to notice them. Kia ora. Ngā mihi nui, kia koutou katoa. I am not an Indigenous woman, but I am an Indigenous identified woman. I'm Chicana from the United States. And I don't know who Scotty Morrison is, but I do maybe have a patai, a question. That's around that, and it's a little bit different for me. So I met my husband, who's Māori, Tūwharetua, Bay of Plenty. He was on sabbatical in Denver, Colorado, where I'm from. And I thought he was a really good-looking Mexicanito that I had overlooked somehow on the horizons. And I had a look at him, and he was in our school speaking to our young at-risk students, Chicano students, and he spoke to them with so much respect and mana. I thought, who is this person that so much love has been poured into him that he can speak to them in this way? And I didn't know what manakitanga was. But I know now, 20 years later, a little bit better, I understand. And here I am. For me, and you mentioned liberation theology, my studies as a young Catholic girl, as a Chicana, I have always felt a tension between what it is to understand my family and their Catholic faith, and what colonization for over 500 years has done, and the debate in the church about whether or not we have humanity, about how we're meant to be objects of production, or all manner of harm and abuse and disabuse. And so there is a tension for me always when I think about Indigenous peoples and the planet across the world. And I believe, I have faith. I continue to be a Catholic, and I continue to question and explore. And so I think this is, if not for Scotty Morris, maybe a question I live with all the time as someone who chooses to be a Christian amongst a community where there are many who have left it behind once they've been educated about the truth of the history of the faith. I want to say Assalamu alaikum. I had a wonderful time for 10 years living in Dubai, learning what it was, a lot more, the stories about Mary and Jesus, may peace be upon him, and all of the prophets. And I spent some time with the Reconstructionist Jewish community in Denver as well, learning about social justice with some fine people. And so in the end, what I have come to is this understanding, and I'll end my question with this. I happened to be at the museum in Washington, D.C. It was brand new, about the Holocaust. And as I came out, I met up with an Indigenous friend of mine who's Native, and he said, Angela, what I want you to understand is that this is wonderful, and that this commemoration, or not that it's wonderful, he said this is a necessary commemoration, and there are 30 million Indigenous people who have not and have never been remembered globally. So contact, Christianity, colonization, colonialism, like I get that. And I'm wondering what your response is as believers. Kia ora.
Okay, hello? So I guess I don't have, just could you just repeat the question part? Well, I'm not sure if I'm not sure why you say there's nothing being done. I thought that's kind of one of the things that Christians do is work for social justice, right? And is that not right?
I'll have a go. I'm just thinking about my walk with God and being Māori. So when I became a Christian, I didn't have a very strong identity as being Māori. I didn't know my reo. I wasn't brought up in tikanga, and I married a Pākehā. So I was trying very hard to live the Pākehā world, even though I look like a Māori, and my whakapapa says I've got Māori blood in me. When I became a Christian, it was one of the first questions I asked God: why did you make me Māori? Because my view of the world was there was nothing good. I wasn't valued as being Māori. And if you are truly a loving God, why did you make me one? So it's been a journey for me for the last 30-something years to come to this realization: God loves me to the bone. He made me Māori on purpose. He made me with a purpose. My purpose, and I'm living it out now in my dream job as a Māori chaplain, is to bring te rangimarie me te aroha ki ngā tangata katoa, aha ko wai no here, aha ko no here. So no matter where you come from, or no matter who you are, the Lord says, I pour my love into you, you pour your love into others. And so I have the joy of doing that from day to day. And as each day goes by, I'm learning more and more about who I am as Māori. I'm learning more and more about my husband being Pākehā. And what somebody did say, it was many moons ago, with the two of us when we were happily married, when we're no conflict, of course. But we, marriage, you do have conflict. You two are like the Treaty of Waitangi in action. So. And that's with fights and happy times. So hopefully that might steer you. I don't know if that answered your question, but it did something for me. Okay. All right, I'll pass this on to you.
Well, thank you. Sorry, I'm going to have to stop here with the time. I'm so sorry. So sure.
Look, I just wanted to say that you've made comments about different types of things that have happened. Jewish, Muslim, Christian. Everyone has had very, very difficult times to go through. The Jews have had the Holocaust. The Muslims have had various different things that have happened with them. The Christians have had persecution. But yes, these things have been sent to us to try us. It's not something we should ever forget. We are to be continuously reminded of it, because what we have to do is to keep striving forward. We have to keep striving forward to create the peace that we want as a world, not as individual nations, but nations coming together to have world peace. That's all.
It is a shortcoming of this format that there's never enough time to kōrero. So I do thank everybody for their involvement in it. I'm going to invite Greg Hewson up. He's one of the driving forces behind the Dunedin Abrahamic Interfaith group. He's going to say a few words and make a few thank yous. Greg.
Kia ora tātou. Thank you, Mike, for being our MC tonight. This is our 20th annual Peace Lecture, and I would like to thank you all for coming. I've been around and handed out, I'm a bit taller, these little cards. It's a painting that was created by Councillor Fliss Butcher about 10 years ago, and Fliss has painted a picture of Ruth Groffman, Mai Tamimi, and myself. Would those people please put up their hands? So we have Ruth and Mai, and about 10 years ago we were at the 2013 AGM of the Abrahamic Interfaith Group, and Fliss photographed us in one of the rooms at the DCC where we used to meet, the Aotearoa room. And then she painted the photograph, and she gave me, Olivia, could you hold up the painting? It's just there. And Mai Tamimi carried this through the rain from where we had our meal to here tonight. So it was like Tania was saying, we go through the rain and we get wet. But Mai said, how can I help? And I said, please carry these things. And we both got very wet, but we're friends. So this says, make tea, not war. And I think this is something that we can all agree on. So this evening has been wonderful, and I'd like firstly to thank the panel, and we have a little gift here for each of you. It's a cup with, on it is our website, dunedaninterfaith.net.nz, and the phrase, make tea, not war. And because Mike Summerfield has done a wonderful job, where's he gone? Mike, we'd like to give you a cup with the same words. Please come and receive this. Let's give Mike a round of applause. We'd like to thank sincerely Professor Janine Hayward for coming this evening to introduce Dr. Jenny Tupar at short notice, and Professor Jessica Palmer, Jess Palmer, I do know Jessica. Hi Jessica, she's watching. Couldn't come, and we had a number of apologies due to sickness, but thank you very much, Janine, for coming. We'd like to give you some Cadbury Roses chocolates, and also some for our cameraman, who's done a great job. Since I retired, I've been doing a bit of photography, and in January of this year, Hilda and I came upon this most beautiful koutou, which is quite rare to see on this side of Te Waiponamu on the east coast, because they're from the west coast. And we found this beautiful bird wading up at Wakawaiti in the lagoon there, Hawkesbury Lagoon. And I went back a few days later and had 6 hours, just this beautiful bird and myself with the koutou. And when I came back, a Māori friend said to me, this will be a good year for you, Greg, that this is a blessing. You should see this as a spiritual blessing. And so I have for you, Jenny, as part of our gratitude for you tonight, and all our love and aroha, and thank you for the wisdom you've shared with us and the honesty you've shared with us and the challenge you put before us to keep on being sensitive to the Spirit and how we function, how we structure our meetings, and who we include and who we who we need to work more closely with. We're on a journey, and this is the first time in 20 years that we've really focused on our treaty partnership and our relationships with each other in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I think this has been very significant. Paul Trabilko said that he hopes this does go on for another 20 years. And I hope so as well. We're a very small, fragile group, but we've now had 20 peace lectures, and they're all on our website, and you've all got our website address. So go home and have a look at that website and go through to see who gave the talk in 2013, who gave it in 2005. Actually, it was me. I'm starting to sound like Tania. That is a good thing. And I've been spending some quality time with Tania recently, and it's starting to rub off. So 20 years ago, I walked through that door with David Longy, and I've got the photo. I put it on my Facebook page of me looking 20 years younger. And David Longy was dying, and we didn't know if he could come. And that morning, he rang me in the chaplaincy office, and he said, "I'm coming." And we had John Watson White ready to read David's lecture because he could hardly stand. But when he came in through that door and 500 people stood and applauded him, he got energy. And he spoke for over an hour. We couldn't stop him. And he was a Methodist. He was grounded in the Christian faith, and he was a peacemaker who learnt that from his Christian faith, and he was a Methodist lay preacher. And towards the end of his life, he asked once again my colleague Reverend Wesafili Hunasa, Methodist minister, to bring him the Eucharist, to bring him the sacraments. As he was dying, he returned to his faith, and may he rest in peace. But getting back to Jenny and the koutou, this is a photo of the koutou, and it comes with all our love, and it's up to you entirely where you put it, but I'm sure you'll find a place for it. But this bird was a blessing to me, and we also have a university bookshop token for you to spend wisely. We recommend the University of Otago bookshop. So please join me in thanking our speaker for tonight, Dr. Jenny Te Pā. And we were going to sing the waiata earlier, He Honore, so I suggest that Hilda comes forward and leads us in that now. And everyone is welcome to come along to All Saints for supper. We have lots of food left over from the meal before the lecture. So come and help us eat up our pre-lecture meal at All Saints.
Yeah.
Whānau, ko tēnei te wā te karakia whakamutunga. Ngā wā o te pauri, o te marama, in good times and bad, o te raru o te hare, in times of tribulation and joy. Awhinatia mai mātou e te mātou e te rangi. Help us, Heavenly Father, kia manako ki tō aroha, to trust in your love. Kia mahi I au mahi, to do your will. Kia whakapai ki tētahi, and to bless others. Kororia ki te atua o te tika o te aroha, God of justice and compassion. No I toha ngā mahi mā mātou, you give us work to do. Arahina mātou ngā iwi katoa hoki I ngā huarahi o te tika o te rangimarie. Guide us and all people in the way of justice and peace. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te atawhai o tō tātou areki a ihu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, āmene.